Hello and welcome to the Trusted Podcast. My name is Blake Johnson. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about retirement planning and what the difference is between planning when you're in retirement versus planning for retirement. And today I've got a great guest. We've got Greg Feese joining us today. So Greg, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Blake. I appreciate you having me today.
Yeah, we're excited to have you and talk about this topic. So why don't you start off giving me a little bit of background about yourself and also about your firm and what makes you the expert in the retirement planning area.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in the Midwest, Central Illinois, not Chicago, small town, farm town, 3 hours south of Chicago. So graduated from a small college south in Southern Illinois area, Greenville. I have a degree in organizational leadership. Got about 12 years of experience in the industry, and my wife and I decided to move out to Las Vegas from Illinois in 2010, and we've really loved it here. Definitely building some roots here. Obviously, now my business is here. My wife loves what she does, and have a new baby on the way, so that's also exciting. And I think just the industry experience is probably one of the most impactful things that can lead to expertise in any field, but specifically this field, because there's so many things that you can't really know until you've experienced them. You can be taught a scenario or you can read about a situation, but until you're face to face with a client that's going through a specific situation, it becomes very difficult to really understand how you would react or how you would help that client until you've actually gone through it. And I think experience is really one of the best things that any advisor can bring to the table. And obviously we can't just buy that or create that. So it just takes time, and you build that up slowly by working with a diverse, large group of clientele over the first typically 3 to 5, 8 years you're in the industry. And I think also having the CRPC, the Chartered Retirement Planning Counselor designation is very helpful. This was a designation that I took a couple years ago just to ensure that I was covering a broad range of actual retirement planning focuses, such as Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, as well as wealth management, income and cash flow scenarios, how to discuss those topics with clients, and just an emphasis on wealth management and risk evaluation, portfolio allocations, all of those type of things as we study those really become beneficial when you're meeting with your clients. So, and then I would also say being a fiduciary. I've always felt that I've always acted in my client's best interest, but there's, in previous companies, there's typically some form of product that they want you to sell. And that makes it sometimes difficult to always ensure that someone is acting in the client's best interest. And, my story is, which I've told you, Blake, is that I left a company because we just disagreed on where I felt the client's needs were. They wanted me to sell a product, and I wanted to do whatever was best for the client. And I think that, you want to make sure you're working with a fiduciary, so your listeners, that would be one of the main focuses I would emphasize today is to ensure that your advisor is a fiduciary.
So go into that more. What does it mean to be a fiduciary as opposed to, working with a big bank like, a Merrill Lynch or a Wells Fargo or something like that, where, they're tied to their company and have to do what the company says versus, what you are?
Yeah, you bring up an interesting scenario. Many of the companies actually have technically fiduciaries on staff. I mean, many of those advisors are fiduciaries, and they typically will have portfolio designs that they can build freely for their clients. And so they may actually be fiduciaries. But we have a lot of people in our industry who the term financial advisor is inaccurately widely used. There are insurance only salespeople who can call themselves financial advisors, and they may have never taken a real financial class before. They don't really understand how markets work, but they understand how maybe an insurance policy might work. And I don't think there's a one product fits all scenario. You have to really step back and evaluate from a comprehensive perspective for every client. We're looking at cash flow or budgeting strategies. what kind of protection through estate planning or an LLC, how does Social Security impact your retirement, and then risk tolerance when building a portfolio, and as well as insurance. What is the insurance need if there is a need? But the problem is when you start to sell one thing over and over because that's what you've been trained, you're not really doing what's best for that client. Not if you're not able to step back and see that whole picture. And I think that's why you see advisors, fiduciary advisors, use the term comprehensive financial planning, because we're stepping back and we're trying to identify from a holistic standpoint what the client's actual needs are, and not looking at it just through tunnel vision. We're trying to see that broad picture.
So what kind of designations or things should people be aware of? What qualifies them someone to be a fiduciary in that regard?
Yeah, there's a couple things. The Series 7 and Series 65, specifically the 65 or 66. Those would be the two exams, as well as the CFP. There's another designation. I don't remember the abbreviation, but it's a fiduciary exam. I don't necessarily know that it's needed unless you don't have the 65 or 66, but those would be some of the primary focuses, especially things like the CRPC, the CFP, the CMA. Some of those designations are important to have.
Basically, a lot of times, if they have something after their name, some letters after their name, it definitely helps.
It definitely helps. It definitely helps. Absolutely, yeah. And I also think that it depends on the school that you take your designation from. Some of them tweak the name a little bit, so they're called something different at different universities. So.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, let's dive in. Let's talk about retirement planning. So, give me a brief overview of how planning in retirement differs from planning for retirement.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that, first of all, no two plans are identical. So there's typically going to be a lot for us to navigate through. We want to make sure that the advice that we're providing to a client is beneficial to them. And when you're building your nest egg, or you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, et cetera, you really kind of got your head down, you're working on your business, you're in the accumulations phase of life. And I think you're looking at things a little bit differently because you are receiving a paycheck, right? Either through your company or through another employer of some kind. So it's a little easier to spend money, to live a little bit maybe differently than how a typical retiree might live, because the actual planning is different. The income you're receiving is different. Maybe you have a pension, maybe you have Social Security, but if you're living primarily off your investment portfolio, you've really got to make sure that you are locked into a budget. You've got to make sure that you're understanding, when you take money out, what does that do to your portfolio, and how does it impact your sustainable spending? Sustainable spending meaning, when am I going to run out of money, right? And we don't know when we're going to die. So we have to preserve our wealth as long as we can. And it's one of the top things we're meeting with retirees about is, if you pull X number of dollars out this year, this is what your future sustainable spending looks like, because it changes based on the market, and the markets are essentially open all the time, right? So if you're globally diversified, which I hope most people are, you really are finding that markets are open at different times throughout the day. So when international markets are open and versus domestic markets, immediately your portfolio projections change with the change of every market condition. So that's part of why we want to meet with our clients, typically retirees, every 3 to 12 months, because we need to make sure we're updated on, what's their cash flow look like, what's their expenses look like, what's the sustainable spending, what new situations have popped up that now they need to address, whether it's, hey, I've paid off a mortgage, or I bought a new house, or I need to get a new car, or healthcare is a big one. When we're in our working years, healthcare is typically paid by an employer. The premiums can be annoying, but it can be a lot worse in retirement years. You definitely have a different a different healthcare design through Medicare and supplement programs, and potentially if you retire early before Medicare but you leave, you may have a COBRA plan that you got to spend a lot of money for, or go out onto the exchange. It's just a different planning strategy because you're looking at it from a different health standpoint. You're looking at it from a different income standpoint, as well as even as far as preserving wealth, and at what point do we implement some form of an estate plan. A lot of times that's done before retiring years, but sometimes it's not. So I think that would be the emphasis on the retirement side, as well as just kind of going back, in those early years, we're really trying to accumulate wealth, but we have this kind of working income that allows us to gauge what we're doing in life. And so it allows you to be a little bit more aggressive earlier on. We will take some risk adjusted approaches, especially as we get older, trying to reduce or mitigate some of those risks that may jeopardize some of that sustainable spending as we get older, because every year we age, we are a little closer to death, and that means we need a little bit less money if you're retiring, and that allows us to plan based on life expectancy and different things like that.
Okay. So what are the three, well, not necessarily, what are the biggest mistakes that you see retirees make from a financial perspective during retirement? And then let's talk about things outside of the financial aspect that are mistakes they make in retirement.
Yeah, sure. So two good questions. I would say the number one mistake I see from any age, any investor, is that they can't tune out the noise. They listen to a friend, the media, somebody has told them something, and I have joked with people in the past, but my first question is, what does this person do? And it's like, well, he's an electrician. Well, I'm sure he knows electricity and wiring really, really well, but and I'm not saying electricians don't know the stock market. I'm just simply saying that's not his profession, right? So when we're taking advice from people who are not in that profession, I think we can get really out of our lane and misguided at times. And I see this frequently, even more so with the media, to be honest. I mean, if you go back and look at some of the media claims during the big market adjusted periods, they're wrong almost every time. I mean, they're very, very negative when they speak about the market. They're always looking for the next change in the market, but equity markets are up more than they're not, substantially. So if we look at the S&P over 100 years, it's positive 7 out of 10 years on average. And the following year of a double-digit negative loss, it's double-digit positive. So the biggest fear that people have in the markets, it's subconsciously always put into their mind, but it actually rarely happens. So I think that would be the biggest negative impact that I see, the biggest mistake that I see people make, when it comes to retirement planning and just identifying how they should build their portfolio and how they should look at it. Probably the next thing that I would touch on here is that they need to, and it piggybacks with that, but they just need to stay disciplined. I think this is where the value of advice or an advisor comes in. We honestly make our money during emotional years, and talking a client off the ledge per se. I mean, I'm confident there will be listeners out there or advisors who were forced to have clients move, reducing equity holdings or move into cash in March, and that has proven to be a colossal mistake. Even if the markets drop again, will it drop to those lows? Probably not. Maybe, I don't know. But the reality is, when we try to time the market, we have to guess twice. We have to guess correctly twice, when to get out and when to get back in. And not only is it very difficult to do once, but it's extremely difficult to do twice. And I think that those are the things that I would absolutely emphasize not to do. Be disciplined, stay the course. Don't try to time the market. Time in the market is more positively impactful to your portfolio than timing the market. And, I also continue to hear this has never happened before statement, and that is true. We haven't shut the economy down. We've never experienced this before. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. We don't know how today's market will close. It could be opposite of how it opened. However, every recession is new. We didn't experience 9/11 until we did. We didn't experience the tech bubble bust until we did. We didn't experience the financial crisis until we did. And the markets were resilient through all of those and came out stronger than ever. And I firmly believe that that's what we will see with this recession as well as the upcoming recessions, and we will face those. Typically you're going to see some form of this on average about once every 10 years. So obviously that's not exactly true, but just as an average over the last 100 years, that's about what we can look at. And we just have to be prepared for it. I think we look ahead. We are planning for the best, but prepared for the worst.
Okay.
I don't know that.
Yeah. What about outside of the financial aspect? What mistakes do you see retirees make in their life in general when they move into retirement?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Actually, it's one that I emphasize as you're entering those final 3 to 5 years, especially of working, is preparing yourself for that culture shock. When you go into retirement, you're used to getting up, you're used to a specific routine, you're used to working or doing something, you have some camaraderie somewhere, and all of a sudden it's kind of just gone. So now what are you going to do? Are you just going to sit at home, watch Netflix all day? Probably not. So you better create a routine. You better have some enjoyment in life where you are occupying your time. And that, I would say that applies both mentally and physically, because I hear a lot of people say things like, well, if I stop working, I'm just on my way to death, or, my brain will stop working. And, if you sit around and don't do much, that's probably true. So we need to exercise our brain. We need to exercise our bodies, whether it's just 3 days a week, going to a class and engaging with people, whether it's every day, bike rides, but do something that creates some activity in your life that allows you to feel that similar sense of accomplishment that you felt when you would go out and accomplish something in your working years.
Yeah, I think of it like even when, I go on vacation. First 3 days, it's great. I just want to sit around and do nothing, sit on the beach. I'm good. Don't want to think about anything. But then after that, it's like, you know what? I kind of miss having a schedule. I miss having something to do, and I start to get bored. It's like, okay, what am I going to do to make myself feel like I'm doing something productive? And so I imagine it's, that to a whole greater scale during retirement. So that's why you see people, they have their weekly golf dates or their weekly, lunch with buddies or whatever the case may be. The other point I want to make, and I'm sure you see this as well, is the people who have pinched pennies their whole life and have more than enough money for their retirement, but they won't take that trip to see their grandkids. They won't go on that cruise around the world, even though they have more than enough funds to do so. So I think that's a mistake as well. Hey, look, you worked your whole life to be able to do those things. It's okay as long as you financially have the ability to do it, and that's where you can come in and say, hey, yeah, let's look at. I think we've had this discussion before with a client where, hey, if you take $50,000 out to do this crazy trip, look what it's going to do to your average monthly income. It had made a difference of $5 a month. Like, it did not impact you at all. So go on that trip. You deserve it. So that would be my one thing there.
I actually think that's a great point. One of the core issues I find with both in the accumulation or pre-retiree and retiree phase is not having a budget. And I find that a lot of my clients in retirement that struggle the most is because they're not on a budget. And one of the things that I teach is that we need to have some cash set aside. Now, there is too much cash. You can have too much cash. So for you cash hoarders out there, there is a number. I don't know what yours is, but there is a certain amount, because cash is a negative equity asset. If I have $1 today or $1 in a year, I want the dollar today, because the dollar in a year doesn't buy the same amount of goods. However, if during our planning years, what we try to do is we try to create these buckets of cash and we earmark them for specific spending habits. And this does a couple of things for you during retirement. Number one, it allows you to keep less cash in your investment portfolios, meaning more of it is tied to the market, which has a higher expected return. So if we have these buckets of cash that are earmarked for travel and vacation, for holiday spending, for emergency funds, for just hobbies, whatever it might be, annual expenses such as auto registration, some form of expense that comes up that typically people just react to. Well, we don't want to be reactive. We want to be proactive with those. So when you look at your account and it's clearly labeled, this is my account for travel and expense, and I've got 2 years worth or 18 months worth of travel money in there, it's very easy for me to say, well, I can obviously afford to go. But when you look at it as one big pile of cash and this is all you have, you kind of view it as, well, if I take anything, I'm going to run out. But if we earmark it for specific expenses, it becomes very easy for people to say, okay, well, I guess I can spend this because this is included in my projections. So I look at things a little bit differently, I think, than some, where I'm actually pinpointing what's important to you. So during our planning process, this is also why I think the DIY guys are going to have such a tough time, because they don't have the training necessarily to think about all these things that they don't know, whereas an advisor does. Our industry is made up much more than just investment management. I mean, that's a small piece of what we do, right? But we're trying to look at how all of your retirement plan will impact you every day. And the last thing I want you to do is worry about it. So let's create a plan that takes that pressure off you so that you can take that trip and see the grandkids, that you can go on vacation. And if you want to pay for a vacation for the whole family because it's a lifelong dream, then we want to put that in your plan and make sure that you can afford to do it. And we'll let you know when you can. And you're absolutely right. We have programs that will tell us, hey, if we pull $50,000 out this year, this is what it does to your sustainable spending. Is that okay? And many times it's very eye-opening when they're like, oh, that's it. So we do want to have those conversations. And again, this is part of why, if you haven't met with your advisor in a while, you need to meet with them, at least on an annual or 15-month basis, depending on your needs. But it allows you to say, well, what does this do? How does this impact me? Where am I at? And including in those vacations and grandkids spending.
That was a huge shift for me when I finally set up a separate account. And, of my monthly amount, we set aside, the majority of it goes to the savings and the other stuff, but I allocate a certain percentage that goes to that fun, we call it the fun account. So that way we don't feel bad. Hey, we've got money in there, let's go on the vacation. That's what that money's there for. It's there to be spent on having fun. If there's no money in there, okay, we can't take the trip. But more often than enough, it's, hey, we have the funds, yeah, let's go have a good experience, and those experiences are far more impactful than the things we buy, or even the success in our careers. And because before that, it was everything in one account, and I was like, nope, can't do it. And then, it's going to deplete our investments. I can't do, can't buy the rental, whatever the case may be is. But once I made that shift, it's like, oh yeah, we can go do that. We can go to Disneyland with the kids. That'd be fine.
When the money is clearly earmarked for something, it's very easy to spend that money. I have a client who likes to buy watches, and spending a lot of money. I mean, watches can be very expensive, but sometimes spending money out of their household money to buy a watch is hard for him. So he creates an account to buy watches, and he saves random money. And when he gets that amount, he buys the watch, right? So, and I think I would even emphasize that a lot of people are afraid of a budget. I had a client yesterday. The husband was all for the budget. The wife was terrified of it. And at the core, she was terrified of the budget because she felt that someone was going to control what she was able to do with her money. And that's completely opposite. The idea is that you control what your money does. A budget, no matter how much money you have or what kind of income range you're in fact, I would argue even the more money you make, the more important it is to have a budget, because otherwise money goes out very easily. When you have less, you tend to penny pinch a little bit more. So it's very crucial to understand the importance of true cash flow analysis. How much do you need every month to pay your expenses as part of that? But if you have an income of $8,000 or $10,000 a month, then guess what? Your budget is $10,000 a month. Whether you're spending it on miscellaneous stuff or saving it, whether it goes to gas. I mean, I can't believe how many people exclude groceries from their budget. And I'm thinking, well, you do need to eat, right? I mean, it has to be part of your budget. So a budget is not purely mortgage and utilities. It is dollars that you spend. Now, there's categories within a budget, and we can break that down and do that type of an analysis. But it is crucial to set this up, and absolutely crucial to do it before retirement. I should go back and make one point here. One of the biggest colossal mistakes is that I have somebody who is 62, ready to retire. They've never been on a budget. They've never met with a financial advisor, and they have no idea if they can retire, but they're ready to put in their notice next week. And it's like, we need more time, right? The advisor needs time to evaluate. You need time to evaluate. We've got planning that needs to be done. So for many of the people that are out there that are within 3 to 5 years of retirement thinking I'll deal with this when I'm closer to retirement, don't wait. You absolutely need to build rapport, build trust with someone now. Make sure that that advisor is a good fit. Make sure that they understand what you want before you walk into retirement, because now you're both going through an unknown path with no experience. And so it's much easier to stumble a little bit when both parties have a lot of unknowns. It's much easier if we spend a couple of years getting to know each other, understanding what your goals and dreams are, getting a sense of how you're going to respond to different market conditions is absolutely crucial. This last 6 months has been very important to me, especially to some of my newer clients or clients that I've never experienced a recession before. How they responded to that allows me to make better recommendations for them in the future, not just with their portfolio, but just in their cash flow, for other areas of their life.
Great stuff. All right. So what are some of the top things retirees can do on their own to make sure that their retirement is not only successful financially, but enjoyable? We talked about that a little bit with
Yeah.
the planning the different accounts. Is there anything else you want to touch on with that?
I think that I would just emphasize the happiness, right? The personal happiness would be the biggest one. Make sure that day to day you're feeling a sense of joy and a sense of accomplishment. Find a group or some people to hang out with. I think your lifestyle is what's important. One of the benefits of the platform and the models that we use is that we don't really feel that we have to worry that much about your investments. We believe in very low cost, diversified platform investments that try to take away the focus on what's the investment doing, should we buy this or get out of that. It's really about the individual client, and that allows them to feel less pressure and allowing them to really get out and just enjoy life. I really would say I've probably summarized this at different times, but I think the budgeting, planning ahead, and tuning out the noise would be the three that I would say can help them in retirement. Stop listening to everyone else. Turn off the media if you need to. Focus on your health and your happiness, and plan ahead. Create a budget. Understand your cash flow. Understand when you're going to draw Social Security. The timing of that can be different for everybody, but the best scenario, if you're healthy and you can afford it, is to typically wait. So those are conversations you need to have, and run those analysis with your advisor, and ensure that you're taking those things at the right time, because what's right for you may not be right for your buddy. Your former coworker may need to take Social Security at 62, and he's squawking in your ear, telling you need to take it, I'm getting this extra money. But the best thing might be for you to wait. We don't know, right? So that's where just that conversation can be very impactful. So the earlier you come in, the easier you will make your transition.
Okay. And I think with anything else, the more planning you do ahead of time, the better off you're going to be. So from a financials perspective, in my industry with trusts and wills, getting that in place ahead of time, it blows my mind how many people come in, hey, we just retired, we're finally going to do our estate planning. What are you talking about? Like, did you not care about who took your kids when they were minors and all those other things? Like, there's a lot of stuff that plans along the way, and it's not just a one and done. It's, we call it a living trust because it's living. You change it, you update it as your needs change. So yeah, hopefully, if you haven't done that planning, and you're not retired, yeah, let's get in and get that done. And I think same thing with choosing a financial advisor, like you mentioned. But if you already passed that point, there's still stuff that can be done, and that's why we bring in trusted experts, like Greg, to make sure that you get the right information so that you can make those decisions. So with that, how can listeners find a trusted retirement financial advisor like yourself? We talked about the designations, but what other things should they be looking for when they're going around looking for somebody to work with?
Yeah, I think you want to ask the advisor if they're a fiduciary, if they're a legal fiduciary. Like I said earlier, the financial advisor title is definitely overused. I would have a list of questions when you're interviewing. If you're going out seeking an advisor, you need to know that you can trust them. I think there's two things I typically will start out some of my conversation with. Is that one of the reasons I'm a little slow in my process? I shouldn't say slow, but I take my time developing a relationship. And I think a lot of advisors, good advisors, do this. And what we're ultimately trying to do is we're trying to interview this person to make sure they're a good fit for our firm, but we're also allowing them to get to know us and we're getting to know them. We want to really make sure if we're going to spend the next several decades potentially together, I would think we should like each other, right? So that would be the first thing, is to approach your meeting as if it's an interview. But you can find different advisors through different websites. I don't necessarily know that there's a few broker dealer FINRA related websites, but those are more commission based. And the RIA side, I'm really not familiar with a general site that directs people neutrally. So, I would look for the designations. I would ask if they're a fiduciary. Make the phone call before you go see them. Simple 2 questions, just make sure that person has the experience that you're looking for. And, typically somewhere in that 4 to 8 year range of experience is probably going to be sufficient, depending on, what type of company they're with or where they work. Those are the type of things you just need to do a little bit of homework. People will spend days and weeks planning a vacation, but if we ask them to spend 30 minutes or an hour, doing a little bit of homework for their finances, it's like trying to climb a mountain. But really it should be opposite, right? We should be putting more time and effort into evaluating who is managing our finances, who's giving us guidance on these things, and who's providing that advice that allows us to go out and live the life that we want to live, that we've worked our life building for.
All right, what red flags should people be on the lookout for with different financial advisors?
Yeah, this may sound a little harsh to some out there, but if the first thing they talk about is life insurance, I'd probably walk away. I have a 8-year background in life insurance, so I feel like I have the right to say that. 8 years prior to being an independent advisor, but this comes back to the one size fits all. That just doesn't exist. I think that there are good products out there. That's not a knock on the products. But if you get the feeling that you're being sold something, you probably are. And there's probably a reason for that, whether it's high commissions or the company pushing a product that they need to sell to hit a quota or whatever it might be. I think you want to, first and foremost, expect that the advisor is willing to listen. I think that if I'm speaking most of the time, I'm probably not doing a very good job. I need to step back and listen to what my clients have to say, because what they say is actually way more important than what I have to say. If I speak too much, I'm probably going to talk over most of their heads. They're not going to follow me enough. So we as advisors need to be very patient with our clients, because this is our profession, and most of them really they want to trust you. And if the advisor if the client can trust the advisor, we don't really need to throw up all of our knowledge on them every time we see them. I think the trust is the line, and we just need to make sure we're always acting in their best interest. The biggest red flag, though, is just make sure they're a fiduciary. They're held to a higher standard. The FINRA commission-based insurance, they're just simply not held to the same industry standards as a fiduciary.
Okay. Well, that's good. Yeah, definitely want someone who's looking out for your best interest. I agree with that. So All right, I think we covered a lot of great stuff. Is there anything else that we missed that you feel needs to be covered in regards to planning in retirement?
Yeah, I'd say one thing. I think a good advisor is going to act like a quarterback for your financial plan. And many times a client will come in and they have no idea that they should have a trust. I think that that would be something that you and I have talked about extensively in the past is, my rule of thumb is if you own a home and you have kids, you probably should have a trust or at least have a conversation around it, right? And most people that don't have a trust or that they're upper middle class or middle class for sure, they're thinking in their mind, well, I don't make enough, I don't have enough for a trust. And that's not really true. A trust can do a lot more than carry wealth into further generations. That's just part of it. So, we're here as advisors to help decide, is this the right time to set up a living trust? Do you need potentially an asset protection trust? What type of trust might make sense? And so we're going to have those conversations and then hopefully pass them to yourself or an estate planning attorney in their area that would allow them to create the full plan. And estate planning is a big, big piece of it, as well as taxation. How is the income you're receiving, the investments, the portfolio design, how's that going to impact you when it comes to tax time? How tax efficient are your investments? So do we need a CPA or is it okay to stay with an accountant? Many times I'm finding my clients are used to an accountant, but the CPA can do a lot more. Many times they have a lot more expertise in this field or they work in a specific taxation field that allows them to really do it a little bit differently than someone maybe with less experience or less training. And so my job, I feel like, is to also help my clients with those things, even guiding them towards when's the best time to refinance the house? Does it make sense to pay off the house? When does it make sense, right? So those are a lot of topics that we'll cover throughout different meetings during a planning process. And I think that many advisors do that. So if your advisor's doing that, then that's a very good thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're a financial advisor. You're not an investment advisor. You're there to, kind of oversee all the financial aspects. That's why I think if you're, as you mentioned before, if they're selling you a product or it's just an investment, they just start telling you what they're going to invest in right off the bat. Those kind of things are kind of red flags instead of looking at the whole picture of, how does this affect your spending? How does this affect what you're trying to accomplish with your other goals? So I really appreciate that. So with that, how can people get in touch with you if they want to use your services?
Yeah, so you can obviously call our office, 702-545-0680. Our website is legacywmglv.com. So it stands for Legacy Wealth Management Group, Las Vegas.com. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. If you type in Legacy Wealth Management Las Vegas for Twitter, you'll find us, as well as we have a Facebook page as well.
Okay. And I'll make sure to put the link in the show notes so that way our listeners can easily find you. Greg, appreciate you being on the show. Really think that we hit some good stuff, and I always appreciate your sharing your knowledge with others.
Absolutely, Blake. Thanks for the opportunity. I enjoyed it, and look forward to talking to you next time.
Okay. And to our listeners, as always, please like and subscribe. That way you get the latest content. Also, please reach out if you have ideas for who we should interview next time. And with that, we'll talk to you later.